Okay, so this is ridiculous. I'm having so much trouble because I am not technologically adept. And I've just been trying to shoot this video for like 2 days. I updated software. I have done all kinds of jumping through hoops, and at every step, it seems to be making what I'm trying to do harder. So I'm just going to do this straight up old fashioned way. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to read to you something that I've written um, that I think is really important, really key to everything that's going on, everything that's surrounding the changes in the world and the new direction and the Great Reset and all the things that are happening. Which I want to point out to me are, I mean, I don't even necessarily know that what's happening is bad. If you were to believe everything that is said by the people that are doing what they're doing, um, they would tell you it's good. And they're like the most professional people in the world. I mean, they work for all the biggest corporations and banks and think tanks and NGOs and everything of that nature. These are managers of people and resources, and they're supposed to be the most responsible in the world. And I don't believe that those people are involved in like a some kind of nefarious conspiracy. I don't believe that. And I think that people are just doing what they're doing because they've been trained to do it. And so I suppose what we have to do is we have to kind of, I don't want to use the word attack because it sounds aggressive, but I want to say that we have to look at it through that lens. I'm going to try something else here. Um, let's try that. Okay. Is that better? Yes, that's better. It should be a little bit better on the sound too. So I've written something, and I'm going to read it. I will be referring to just below the camera here, so I know I'm giving too much information. It's kind of what I do. Okay, here we go. I want to give you some feelings that I have about everything that's going on, because man, uh, me personally, I've lost my job, which means that I have to go out and find a new job. But in a sense, that was what needed to happen anyways. Everything that we're being told, and I'm listening to the people who are telling us how this is going to be moving forward, everything we're being told is that the world is about to change in drastic and fundamental ways. And so the question is, can I stop it? No, I can't stop it. How can I stop it? I'm just a crazy guy with a lot of conspiracies and put whatever labels you want on me. But I have done some substantial reading and listening to a lot of people make a lot of interesting arguments, and I have a kind of an understanding of the world that I like to think is rational. I think that I'm a rational person, and so I'm going to read to you what I think is a rational argument for the way that things are being done. Because it's really the way that things are being done that's the problem for me. I could go more into that, but I I've been at a couple of protests, and I've spoken to lots of people, and I've taken part in a lot of the dialoguing that's going on Facebook. And I'm trying to avoid, in every case, the conspiracy stuff and anything that kind of relates back to pedophilia or sexual deviance or like anything that sounds crazy and is easily dismissible. And I'm not doing that because I'm trying not to sound crazy. I mean, there's a lot of wacky stuff that goes on. Can we just admit that? There's a lot of wacky stuff, and people engage in a lot of weird things. And it's not necessarily good for human development or behavior. But it's a distraction. Some of it's real, some of it's not, but it's a distraction. So it doesn't matter. What I want to get to is the people that are actually doing what they're doing right now, the people that are actually taking over the world, like the World Economic Forum and the WHO and all the various public health agencies and all the stakeholders and the stakeholder capitalism and everything that's taking place. And it's all, I mean, this is not a conspiracy theory. What I'm saying, everything I just said just now about stakeholder capitalism and the WEF and the Great Reset, that's all real. That's all real. It's happening. Most people don't see it. Most people don't refer to it. It's happening behind the scenes, and they are re-envisioning the way the world is going to move forward. They've done it through all kinds of initiatives enacted through the UN, specifically through Agenda 21 to lay the groundwork, and then through Agenda 2030 to implement the plan. We went into the implementation of the plan in 2015. This is the acceleration of those plans, and it just kind of coincides with this pandemic. Now, am I saying there's no pandemic? No. Am I saying there's no virus? No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying that viruses exist, respiratory viruses exist. I'm saying that there's a lot of circumspect stuff around the way that governments handled the entire crisis. But at the end of the day, all the things that were achieved through their handling of the crisis coincide with goals in Agenda 2030. They just do. But specifically, I want to talk about this one, because this one is really important. And this one, I think you're finding a lot of people at these protests and stuff, if there's a singular issue that they focus on and that brings them together, it has to do with how we consider what is health, how it should be implemented, and who should be in charge of that, and should vaccines be a part of that. So that's really where I'm going. Vaccines. This is all about vaccines, in my opinion. It is the linchpin. And if the linchpin of all of the things that they want to do has to do with mandating vaccines for people, that has to be a problem. Like, that has to be a problem for some people. I mean, it's a big deal to suggest that vaccinations are going to save everyone from everything, and yet they do. And I'm going to show you how. Okay, so now with all that preamble out of the way, I'm just going to read this to you, and I think that there's nothing irrational about what I'm saying. So all I ask is that you listen through to the end. It's going to take a while. I wrote quite a bit here, and it's going to take about 45 minutes. So let me get started, because I'm reading off my laptop and the battery might die. There's all kinds of things that are trying to keep me from getting this out, but I'm going to try anyway. Okay. Let me start with the opening line, which I think sets the tone for where I'm thinking and how I'm thinking. Today is a good day. It is a good day because it provides us with a unique opportunity to discuss some things that didn't seem nearly as important about our everyday lives until events coalesced and convened together in such a way that it has brought the issue of how our world is to move forward from this place to the fore. And what is this issue I'm referring to? What is that discussion that is now forced on us to be had? In my mind, it revolves around what happens to be the single biggest falsehood and misrepresentation of science repeated in our societies for decades. That lie? Vaccine producers and Big Pharma care about you. It's sort of an odd position to take, isn't it? It's the opposite of what we see happening in every other way we conceive of power dynamics and systems, in so many headlines that get blazed across the papers and TV chyrons. Systemic racism needs to be addressed. How can we be more inclusive to leave no one behind? There's a big difference between equality, and equity. That's a good one. That one's new. I'm ad-libbing here, but I'm sure you've heard that one. Now, these types of headlines, I believe, tend to come from people who, for better or for worse, mean well. These are social justice sentiments. And while we can talk about the merits of looking at everything through the lens of who has the power and who does not, I hope that it's not escaping our media watchdogs and our social justice campaigners that when we take the awesome power of the state and use it to enforce mandated vaccines on the public, that's a pretty obvious abuse of power. Vaccines, no matter how you slice it, are medical interventions that some people, for whatever reason, don't want forced on them. According to OpenSecrets.org, the #1 influencer in Washington is the pharmaceutical industry, spending $2.6 billion on lobbying activities from 1998 through 2012. In case you're wondering, that's the #1 position over the same time period, followed by numbers 2, insurance at $1.8 billion, and number 3, oil and gas with $1.4 billion, and defense and aerospace coming in number 4 with a measly $662 million. So not only is it the most influential in the pay-to-play way, it's also one of the most disingenuous industries in the world, because we're talking about the same industry that does vaccines and other products, like drugs for other forms of health and mental management, that have been shown time and time again to downplay the risks and side effects from their products while extolling the benefits. Has there ever been a more clear and evident case of the rich abusing the rest? This is power dynamics. We know that if you want good health, mental and physical, it is not to be found at the pointy end of a syringe or in a bottle. It is to be found in healthy food, healthy attitudes, healthy play, and yes, meaningful work. And of course, clean air, clean water, and a healthy Mother Earth to sustain all of those things. But Big Pharma doesn't do that for us. They don't do any of that for us. It's not part of their business model. They sell the illusions of health, and sadly, people buy them. Now, I'm not saying all this to say that there are not useful and practical things that come out of these industries that have not at least had some measurable effect on our lives. They have, of course. But the fact is, we're told over and over again what they're doing, these wonderful humanitarians of our advanced civilizations, is in some way the greatest thing that society has ever come up with. Fire, the wheels, sliced bread, vaccines. If you listen to the experts like Billy Gates and Fauci and every skeptic out there who has made it their mission to debunk any and all criticisms of this wonderful technological miracle that apparently encompasses any and all vaccines, bar none that I'm aware of, but please let me know if I'm missing something, then you're just a foolish conspiracy theorist or a quack. Even with the missteps of previous eugenic and sterilization campaigns in the rear view, something that is rarely discussed but happened, the very thought that perhaps the science of vaccination could or would be used by actors who had less than messianic convictions for their products is anathema to public discourse in recent years. So, that's not a very good flowing statement, but what I'm trying to say is you can't talk about it because obviously it's good, and if you suggest that it's not good, there must be something wrong with you. You can't talk about it. It has been banned from discussion and removed from rational discourse by responsible news programs because it turns out when people would come onto programs where the discussion took place between an advocate of vaccination and someone who was presenting the counter-argument, shockingly, the latter would always come off as looking for rationality and asking good, well-formulated questions, and ask inevitably for nothing more than either additional or improved study, or the thing that it was decided could never be tolerated: a study of health outcomes of the health outcomes of vaccinated versus unvaccinated people. Well, please, the argument would always come from the big pharma rep. We already know that vaccines have saved countless lives, and if you wanted to do that study, there would be a
cascade of people dying all over the world as a consequence. Children dying 1 in 1,000 from measles. More children still subjected to the iron lungs from the earlier days of the polio scares that kickstarted the massive influence of the industry itself. So we can't do that. And in fact, it would become tiresome and oh so much wasted effort in dealing with these crazy people who want to cause harm and death to countless innocents. Talking points always and inevitably end sort of like this. Well, that person is just a crazy kook denier of science and should be dismissed as such. We do not give these people a platform. They're just confusing the general public with all their questions and concerns. We know the history of vaccines. They are safe and effective and have saved countless lives. In fact, it's a foregone conclusion that this is undeniably true. So why should we even have that conversation? What we should do is make them mandatory so that we can be done with this charade of a conversation with foolish people who will only cause great harm to others. But this one is my favorite. As per the Supreme Court ruling in 2016, vaccines are unavoidably unsafe. They said that. I don't know about how you view this type of thinking, but I've seen it played out countless times, and every time the answer is to dismiss the possibility of dissent and promote authoritarian values. And so I ask you, is this not a social justice issue? Is this not the big bad corporate world telling the little people that they must do as they're told, even though it may cause harm? How many people are familiar with the Vaccine Injury Court? How many people know that it has paid out over $3 billion in damages since its inception in 1986? And trust me, they don't like to frivolously give away money. Every single dollar of that $3 billion could be in no way paid out for any other reason than clear and undeniable proof that damage was caused by a vaccine or a battery of vaccines that they tell us are unavoidably unsafe. Have you ever wondered how it became this way? I'm sure it's in no small part due to huge amounts of money, influence, power, stated goals of eradication, and campaigns of information aimed at parents and medical practitioners, government, health agencies, and every conceivable organization out there whose goal is to promote the cohesion. Not only on the local level at your doctor's offices and local clinics, but also to promote that cohesion on the planetary scale at the behest of business and society. If you're paying attention, you may have noticed that I put the order of needs in that phrase with business first, because the truth is, so do they. The story of how the vaccination industry became so powerful is a long and interesting history. And if you'll spend some time looking into it on your own, I guarantee you'll find the same voices again and again crying out to keep you from doing anything other than listening to them and deferring to their expertise. There's no question that vaccination is the finest medical achievement of the modern world, they will say. In fact, we don't even have to think about it, and soon enough, according to the plan and the agenda, you and I won't be given the option to make those choices for ourselves. If nothing else, COVID-19 has provided both big pharma and our public health agencies who not only buy, but sell and actively promote for their own selfish reasons the kinds of sentiments I'm describing, with the situation they have recently been calling for and working towards for decades: mandatory vaccinations. Oh no, they'll say, it won't be mandatory, but you just won't be able to have your lives back without it. No job will be allowed without it. No universal basic income will be provided without compliance to it. No travel outside of the home, and maybe even no home will be afforded to those silly people who think they can go on in the post-COVID-19 world that is currently being set up in the background thanks to our friends at the World Economic Forum and their now totally necessary and inevitable push to the Great Reset they have been planning for years. After they themselves, with the help of their friends in the global community, planned for this inevitability and are now seizing the reins of control over our lives. But don't concern yourself with it. It was inevitable, given all the things they tell you about the dangers of displaced people that was heading our way after the Fourth Industrial Revolution could hit the tipping point if we were not prepared, and could have created a potentially chaotic existence. My, how lucky we are that they were looking out for us. As a point of interest, you could make the argument that these people are looking out. for people in the world. But by looking out for people means that you're going to control every aspect of their lives, and you're going to put them in this blockchain where they can never really crawl out of it unless they absolutely agree with the orthodoxy of the entire system from the top down. There's some questionable motivations there. It's a little questionable. Okay. Yeah. So, it was inevitable, given all the things they tell you about the dangers of displaced people that was heading our way after the Fourth Industrial Revolution could hit the tipping point, and if we were not prepared, could have created a potentially chaotic existence. They're looking out for us. You little free humans can be such a burden on their world and just a little too unpredictable, especially if you were all being displaced by technology and sitting at home on the public dole, now free with the time to sit and think. Just imagine how difficult those people would be if they kept demanding rights instead of protection. Yes, now that we're all really scared into compliance, it's the right time to make it permanent with the biggest, baddest surveillance state ever conceived. Get those 5G towers up before the people start figuring out what's going on. Am I right? As a side note, when everything transfers from the former material world where we could all interact with one another, free from the influence of the sensors, do you really think it's going to be long before the new digital future we're entering into won't be scrubbed of alternative viewpoints for your own protection from bad actors who keep encouraging you to absorb more information and to think for yourself? Imagine what hubris to suggest that people could think for themselves. But should you? Again, I suggest you look into it. I'm not getting paid for my suggestions, and I don't wish to impose my will on anyone, so I'm already in the opposite camp from the people who wish to tell you how your life is going to be from now on. I suppose I'm just doing it because I'm a denier, whatever that means. So being the bad actor that I apparently must be, according to our public health experts, I would suggest you go to BitChute or BrandNewTube or one of the many other platforms popping up around the interwebs as alternatives to YouTube because Google has just been so busy protecting you from the bad ideas that might go against the authoritarian impulses of their safe censorship policies that have only come around in earnest in the last few months because now the danger of not listening to our social controllers has become a real threat to our very existence. See how that works? But if I can leave you with 3 names that should be in your typical DuckDuckGo searches, may I suggest Del Bigtree and his program The Highwire. Check out Robert Kennedy Jr. and his amazing site Children's Health Defense, and look up Suzanne Humphreys and read her excellent book Dissolving Illusions. In fact, there are many more people out there who are summarily attacked and dismissed with countless hit pieces from the usual suspects whenever they simply can't stand keeping their mouths shut anymore in the face of this medical tyranny. They run the spectrum from New Age gurus to reform pharmaceutical representatives to people like Dr. William Thompson of the CDC, who had his story told by the documentary Vaxxed, which was in turn promptly dismissed as pseudoscience. The way this is done time after time is the tried and true method of damage control by PR agencies, individual actors at the behest of big pharma cash-in prizes, and true believers, often the so-called skeptic community out there, self-appointed hall monitors for the status quo, whose only real moral failing is that they seem to wish to be accepted into the crowd that has all the money and influence. I'm not questioning their motivations either. But I wonder if they see just who and what it is they're defending these days. Perhaps defenders of the vaccination orthodoxy work in a lab or a hospital or a pharmaceutical company, and they went through the same indoctrination that most people go through on a casual basis thanks to their local news affiliates. But theirs is much more intense, and in a lot of cases I think it's safe to say it forms their egos. But I don't hold them in contempt. That's how tobacco science worked after all. They fostered doubt and what-if mirages, reinforcing it with propaganda that profits paid for. I'm sure it hasn't gotten any better in the decades since it was first used as a practice. What a laughable concept that the biggest industries in the world would get better at promoting their bottom lines. I hear often from people who used to be pro-vaccine until one of 2 things happened. Oh, sorry, I skipped a line there. That said, I would like to point out here what I have always considered to be an interesting phenomenon between the 2 warring factions. if it makes it easier to envision the presumed sides. I hear often from people who used to be pro-vaccine until one of two things happened. Excuse me. Either they would have a child that became vaccine damaged and it forced them to turn to the alternative community that was actually trying to support them in their efforts to rehabilitate their child, and they would do so without judgment. In fact, they would help fight for recognition from a bureaucratic guard agency that has been set up to protect manufacturers from liabilities, literally giving them immunity in the United States, where most of these larger companies came from. The other reason people would turn against the vaccination orthodoxy would be doctors, nurses, clinicians, naturopaths, holistic medicine practitioners, and other alternative health providers would be so foolish as to start reading the very rarely reported facts and studies that show negative associations with increasing vaccination schedules. The ones who may have been formerly regarded as cutting-edge leaders in the world or in their field, only to be labeled as quacks once they deviated from the vaccination cult. And then we have the opposite to those loons. The ones who believe in science, the ones who make tremendous amounts of money by denying there could be any risk, and always point the finger anywhere but themselves. Well, that's not the psychopathic profile of a giant corporation, now is it? Here's an interesting excerpt from an article entitled, "Are Corporations Psychopaths?" Psychopaths are typically intelligent, personable, and disinhibited, and have an alluring aura of confidence. Yet they also lack feelings of empathy, guilt, and remorse. That seemingly minor emotional quirk has had a dramatic effect on the way they behave, often leading to antisocial behavior. However, psychopaths are not incapable of moral reasoning. Multiple studies have found that they are particularly adept at certain types of moral thinking, particularly those that balance the consequences of actions. So where non-psychopaths might experience revulsion at the intentionality of killing one person to save the lives of several others, psychopaths are far more likely to dispassionately favor the needs of the many over the needs of the few. They make good utilitarians. But now, take the influence of money and combine it with the awesome power of government. Check out the documentary 1986, The Act, for more on that. I should warn you, though, it's been produced by Dr. Andrew Wakefield, and as we all know, he's a quack. Am I right? Imagine, you destroy a highly capable and respected young doctor's career by fabricating a story around the actual events that took place after a press conference he gave suggested they found an issue in the gut bacteria of children who were vaccine injured. Go ahead and look up whether or not there's been any recent research into gut microbiome in autism. But that's a good snapshot of the loons and quacks and science deniers we find playing Davy against the pro-vaccine Goliath. And they, of course, have their front men and women who advocate for the continuance and additions to the vaccination schedule that has gone, according to Children's Health Defense, from the 1986 level of 12 shots and 25 antigens for 8 diseases to the new and improved 54 shots and 70 antigens for 16 diseases in 2019. Well, obviously kids are healthier these days, right? I mean, I know that's not a scientific statement or anything, but it's also not scientific to say that autism... Let me try that again. I mean, I know that's not... Okay, look, I'm just going to... Right from the top. Ready? Well, obviously kids are healthier these days, right? I mean, I know that's not a scientific statement or anything, and it's also not scientific to say that autism prevalence has gone from, according to the CDC's own website, 1 in 150 on the spectrum in the year 2000 to 1 in 54 in 2008. Keep in mind that was 12 years ago, and I bet the trend has reversed course. So, why can't we have clear and open discussions about this stuff? I mean, surely it must be considered something of importance to think about. We can talk forever about the problems that society has had to deal with systemic racism and inequality. Both of those things, of course, can only be solved if we give enough power to government agencies that will work hand in hand with the giant corporations to save us from the bad people we used to be before we let them tell us about... Doesn't flow very well. We can talk forever about the problems that society has had to deal with of systemic racism and inequality. Both of those things, of course, can only be solved if we give enough power to government agencies that will work hand in hand with the giant corporations to save us from the bad people we used to be, before we let them tell us about it endlessly until finally we are all giving in and saying, "Do whatever you want, just please stop telling me how bad I am so I can get on with my life." The incurable and irreconcilable problem seems to be this: details lend themselves to too much speculation and splitting of hairs for people whose job it is to literally foster and promote their own versions of reality, and the ones upon which we have been told modern medicine and healthcare has been built around, thus making it easy to attack people from outside the status quo. Any challenge to the industry, then, has become a threat to all people. Freedom itself is the threat to the new biosecurity world state. The amount of money and influence it took to build this reality is mind-blowing, and it has no counterpart or adversary that can mount an offensive strategy as centralized and monotheistic as it does. To quote a scene that sums it up nicely, "Oh, I'm afraid the Director Shield will be quite operational when your friends arrive." Star Wars reference. The point being is that, it's you thought maybe you had something going on, but we got it all. We anticipated you. We planned for all of this. The Death Star is real, and it's about to blow some shit up. The Church of Modern Medical Science is a predator introduced into the world that has no natural enemy that can properly mount a worthy defense against its various tentacles and talons. It doesn't just control what gets accepted as mainstream science. It controls the very agencies and players whose job it is to regulate its own environment. Those organizations have long since become captive to the industry that has dominated them. It's called regulatory capture, and it happens when government watchdog regulatory groups that are supposed to be watching out for the public good become so embedded and regarded as experts in their specialized fields that they walk in and out of the industries they're supposed to be regulating. It happens all the time in major industries that affect our modern world: banking, agriculture, health, energy, technology. Now, I would like to point out here that when I describe this group of elites in industry and finance and policy, I'm literally describing the Davos crowd, a group of wealthy, influential people who sit atop the giant corporations and influence peddling organizations of the world and decide how the future is going to be. Those same people then go to the UN and sit on the various committees and advisory panels, or they go to the think tanks and NGOs that work together with the WEF or the WHO or the IPCC. But without question, these people all live within an echo chamber that has long since stopped listening to what their intellectual inferiors think about how they should be able to conduct their own affairs under their own roofs in their own homes. They're not listening to you. That's you. That's me. We don't matter. Because we are not part of the club. We are not part of the club that has the most money, time, and influence at these organizations that are, as we speak, literally telling us how our lives are going to be. And so with that as the backstory, I want to talk about the one place where all those different industries come together and agree. Vaccines are good. In fact, they're not just good, but vitally important. How do I know this? Because of Agenda 2030. All those people I just mentioned, the ones whose lives are totally unconcerned with hearing counter-arguments because they have become so focused on pushing for their solution that provides for and paves the way to a better future as they envision it in both the business and societal spheres. All those people who have agreed to implement this plan agree with the vaccination cult. 14 of 17 SDGs for Agenda 2030 hinge on vaccines and figuring out how to get people to take them. They have spent endless resources on trying to figure out how to do this. Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance, is telling us how important it is. It's their reason to exist. It seems like now they may have finally found their silver bullet. So, Everything that is being behaviorally programmed into our minds through constant reinforcement and messaging is about this one very thing. Because without it, they can't create the new utopian world they have envisioned, where needless... Oh, sorry. Not needless. So everything that is being behaviorally programmed into our minds through constant reinforcement and messaging is about this one very thing. Because without it, they can't create the new utopian world they have envisioned, where needles give health and slavery to that ideology is akin to freedom. This is, of course, insane. I don't want to get into the detailed history of vaccines, but there is one element of that history I would like to shine the spotlight on, if you'll indulge me, to try and make a point. Specifically, I would like to talk about measles. We are told, as I have been by my own family doctor, that measles is a dangerous disease. We are told that 1 in 1,000 can suffer serious side effects if they were to catch it. This is bullshit. It isn't true. But how then do people like our various health agencies and the WHO get away with scaring people by telling them it is a deadly disease and that we need to eradicate it with vaccination? How can they lie about the potential for negative outcomes or skew reality to fit their narrative? Some of you might already know where I'm going with this, but for the people who aren't old enough to remember when family sitcoms from just a few decades ago, measles was considered a pretty much benign disease, because it was. When one kid would get sick with measles, just like with chickenpox, parents would invite kids over from the class or neighborhood to play so they could all be exposed long enough in enclosed settings and quarters to get the virus, and then they would all stay home for a week or two until it passed. No big deal. So then again, I ask you, how do you think they came up with these scary predictions of a danger for 1 in 1,000 kids? If you said they used the entire world to get that stat, you get a gold sticker. You see, it is a relatively benign disease, as long as you're relatively healthy when you get it. Is this sounding familiar at all to people? Like, as in, this sounds like something else that's going on that sounds familiar, but I just can't put my finger on what it might be kind of vibe? Well, yeah, COVID, for a scary new disease, has a designation of COVID-19, as in Coronavirus ID 2019, as in one every year, and the only thing, as in there is one every year, and the only thing that has changed that seems to have made this one more deadly than any other is the panic and the fear and the confusion that was provoked by the CCP through a propaganda that was provoked through the CCP, Communist Chinese Party, Chinese Communist Party, through a propaganda campaign in the early months of 2020. And then the fire of fear and confusion was stoked and pushed further by Billy Gates and the WHO, and then our own public health agencies. In case you live under a rock, Billy Gates' organization, Gavi, and the CCP out of China are the two largest funders of the WHO. So just to wrap up my comments about the measles and why we needed to fight the measles with a vaccine, let me ask you a question. Who suffers the most when a child gets measles? As in, historically, what happened when a child got the measles and had to stay home for 2 weeks? And this was, keep in mind, a long time before the concept of remote working was even conceivable as a thing. Who was really hurt when a child got measles? Keep in mind, back then there was a thriving middle class, with most people getting married younger, settling down earlier, having a house with a white picket fence, a couple kids, and a dog. But women who had historically been homemakers, as the men's incomes would up to that time be enough to afford all those pleasantries on one salary if you did things the right way, and you could still plan for kids' education, a cottage, and a comfortable retirement. But women had been entering the workforce between the 30s and the 70s in such a way that by 1970, 50% of single women and 40% of married women had entered the workforce. Now, without getting into the details around that, as I know we have all been told in recent years it's because the men oppressed the women and that's all you need to know, I bring it up just to point out one important thing. Who would watch the children when they had to stay home for 2 weeks? Well, the moms, that's who. And guess what? That was sort of a pain for the business owners who considered it their job to create the kind of workforce that would improve their bottom lines. In particular, very rich people saw the benefits from creating health care that made their employees able to show up for work without having to fight about whether or not they should have to pay them to stay at home with their sick kids. And when did the measles start coming out? Oh, excuse me. And when did the measles vaccine start coming out? In the early 70s. Huh. And why? It's no small part of the puzzle. The vaccine industry is built up with massive investment in the 40s and 50s to fight polio around the same time that the WHO was establishing itself on the world stage. In the late 50s, the WHO made themselves a vital part of the effort to rid the world of smallpox. This, of course, required coordinated efforts among countries and pharmaceutical companies who just kept getting bigger and more powerful. An interesting excerpt from that period. WHO efforts came under criticism from some healthcare workers and human rights advocates. Some public health administrators charged that campaign workers at times bent WHO and local regulations. Some human rights advocates objected to the search and quarantine aspects of the program. Later, some critics claimed that physicians used coercion to ensure vaccination of quarantined individuals. That is from, you can go to the History of Vaccines timeline. It's got all that stuff there. There's a particular segment that is entitled 1967 WHO Pushes Eradication Efforts. Of course, sometimes we forget the lessons of the past, and even the players at the WHO get accused of misdeeds. Let me try that again. Of course, sometimes we forget the lessons of the past, and even the players. WHO gets accused of misdeeds. I have to fix that part. I'll make a mental note here. That doesn't flow very well. The point is that we forget about stuff that happened in the past. We have been trained to have the kind of a memory of a fruit fly, and that stuff, the WHO has been accused of some pretty shady stuff in their past, but we forget about it. It doesn't matter, right? And so they just keep doing what they're doing. They press on, right? Because they care so much about everyone. Nobody cares about your family more than you do. Okay? Now I'm going off script again. I just want to make this point. A giant corporation bent on controlling every aspect of lives, and I call it a corporation, but really it's a conglomeration of countries and NGOs and corporations and think tanks and academics. They all have come up with the same solution. It's called Agenda 2030, the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. 14 of the 17. There's a graphic out there by Gabby, which I will include with this, where 14 of the 17 hinge on vaccination. I tried to make that point earlier. I think it didn't come out as well as I wanted it to, but 14 of 17. So their new utopia that they're creating within the next 10 years can only happen if mandatory vaccines happen. Okay, that's really, really important. Everyone's agreed to do this. So everyone is on board with the plan. Now, COVID is just giving a wonderful excuse to have everything that they wanted done. This is not that complicated. As for the pharmaceutical companies themselves, after the previous successes that established their necessity as public health agencies that can now save people from scary possibilities that magically always were more deadly around typically malnourished and impoverished populations and wartime, now they needed a new market to expand into and new product lines to push. And they had just created the combined MMR vaccine, licensed in 1971. This would be the grand push again, with assistance from the WHO. So the WHO really helped to make sure that not only were vaccines being used, they became like a worldwide priority because they saved so many lives, we're told. And if you can't see the way that business creates situations that it solves with its products, especially the medical business, then I don't know what to say to you. I just don't. You could blame that on capitalism, but if somebody's selling you a beauty product, um, and you think it makes you feel better about yourself, there is some utility in that. But if someone's selling you a health product and they just, like, any negative consequences are just like, they become, you can't talk about negative things that are associated with vaccines because then there's something wrong with you. Do you see the problem with creating a scenario like that and then creating a giant World Health Organization who makes it their mission to vaccinate every single person on the planet? Does anybody see a problem with that? Anybody? No? No? Okay. So where was I? So the WHO is helping to, they helped to create the entire vaccine industry, really. I mean, the WHO helped to legitimize and make vaccines it's the single greatest thing that's ever happened to humanity. And if they didn't believe it, then why would 14 of 17 be directly connected to that? You tell me. The rest, as they say, is history, but it was a history full of money and influence, and particularly in the developed world, putting the needs and interests of business at the forefront on two specific levels. One, increase profits and sales, and two, by making all the gains from getting rid of deadly diseases that were in fact just more sick days for employees and their children go away, so that everyone can make more money, especially the ownership class. It's funny, but I distinctly remember something that was said to me and my wife when she was pregnant with our firstborn. And I went out and bought a handful of books to do some reading and see if I couldn't come up with my own opinion on what I thought about going with the schedule that was proposed and being mercilessly pushed through every medium, including our family doctor. But a friend of ours told us the reason for her getting her girls vaccinated was that she didn't want to have to risk the time off work if one of them got sick. And somebody said that to me, and I was just like, I was reading these books, what? And there it was. I was literally floored about the callousness of her attitude. Here, I had been reading about how all these vaccines were being introduced to protect kids against relatively benign diseases, with the reason being sold to parents that there might be awful consequences if they were to catch these diseases organically, and it was a total lie. The fact was that they wanted the profits and the workforce at work. They were willing to lie and scare people for that end. And all the potential negative outcomes were always at best downplayed and concealed, and at worst, straight up lied about. If the intervention causes more harm If the intervention causes more harm than the disease itself, but they lie to skew the statistics in their favor and make a false reality, which they then spoon feed to people whose job it is to protect their patients, why on earth would they not be doing this right now? If we can hope that anything good comes of this, it will be that right now, this is getting the spotlight. And you can count on the agencies and influences I mentioned above making it their priority to distract and deflect from reality, to push what they wanted before all this new normal and post-COVID world talk being pumped out by the WEF since March started. In fact, this has been the agenda all along. All they needed was the excuse to put free people into bondage. It doesn't have to be a conspiracy to suggest that plans have been laid out, in some cases for decades, with the express purpose of molding public opinion based on a presupposition that what they are doing is all based on their impenetrable, unassailable truth. Vaccines have saved countless lives. This is at best an exaggeration based on believing the very same tobacco science PR teams that tried to fool the general public back in the last half of the 20th century. Again, I have to fix this. I see it now that I'm reading out, but I have to fix it. This is at best an exaggeration based on believing the very same tobacco science PR teams that tried to fool the general public back in the last half of the 20th century, and at worst, a total fabrication of reality. To hell with the consequences. So what I'm saying is, it's at best an exaggeration of the truth by, like I said, just constantly saying safe and effective, safe and effective. It saved countless millions and all these people have been saved by vaccines, and if you don't get the vaccine, 1 in 1,000 children's going to suffer severe side effects from measles. That's, I mean, like, it's not true. It's not true. It's not true. I don't know what else to tell you. It's not true. You have to be really unhealthy and have some serious deficiencies, probably in vitamin D and C. It tends to be that those things are very, very important and cheap for keeping people healthy, and exercise and all the good things that you need. Healthy attitudes, joy. Preferably you don't freeze at night and you can keep yourself warm. And if it's too hot, you can cool off. These are all things that help to regulate human health more than a needle. Sorry, it's true. It's true. It's true. How do you not know it's true? Like, I didn't do polio, but there's a whole nother story with polio. And it really did kickstart the beginnings of the vaccine industry's influence in the world. And, you know, there's a lot of questionable things that they did around keeping records and how they altered some of the, like, it was the original COVID, okay? Look, polio was bad. I know a guy that was put into an iron lung, or I know a guy that was paralyzed. I know kids that got brain damage from lead poisoning. I mean, like, that stuff happens, but you can't stop lead poisoning with a needle. You can't stop air pollution with a needle. So all the things that big industries do to pollute our environment, and then sell us a cure through the end of a syringe, it's all just about business. It isn't. These externalities, right? Things that happen to people. They get poisoned, whether it's environmental. Back then, they had DDT, lots of it, DDT, to cause the same kind of effects that polio did magically. They were bathing kids in DDT. So look, it's not as clear cut as most people put it. Again, I would go say read Suzanne Humphrey's book, Dissolving Illusions. She goes into the historical record and documents a lot of what they did, and it's a fantastic book. Just read it. Okay. So it's an exaggeration, and to hell with the consequences. So they exaggerate the benefits of vaccination, say that it saved millions of lives. They give the reasoning to build up these businesses, and the WHO gets bigger and bigger with more influence. And now COVID, boom, we take over the world, and it's because of vaccines going to save you. And to hell with the consequences. Does that sound familiar at all? Does that sound familiar at all? This type of thinking is at the very heart of the devil-may-care attitude that has pervaded big business interests and the worst side of capitalism since the dawn of the Industrial Revolution. The idea being that we make the money first and only extol the virtues of that venture while downplaying the risks and externalities that may have been caused in your wake. That is the bad side of industrial capitalism. And it is the one we are usually told is the one we want to leave behind. So why then do people think that the opposite is true in the misappropriation of science at the behest of big business, and that it somehow becomes virtuous only when it comes to the production of vaccines? We know for a fact that mostly the very same players, agencies, and pharmaceutical companies who make said vaccines also produce pills and medicine in other areas, a handful of which are actually helpful, and most of the rest are always associated with higher incidences of long-term negative health outcomes, addiction, and death. And we are now trusting these people with our very futures over a disease that kills almost no healthy people. For people under 70, you're more likely to die in a car accident than from COVID-19. But all the dangers and pitfalls that we know are associated with poverty and despair and the violence that typically accompanies those conditions do not choose the weakest among us. They can strike seemingly indiscriminately. And so now the greatest social justice cause of all, human freedom, hangs in the balance because of what a bunch of the richest, most powerful people in the world are telling us we need to do. The fight against this corrupt application of public health priorities is the very essence of a true social justice campaign. These people exemplify the worst kind of corruption that money can buy. It's time to tell those people they do not own us. We are not their property. We are free. Took me a couple days to write that. Well, I should say probably 3 or 4 hours. And I had a bunch of stuff. I had a lot of. I'm gonna put that up. There's a bunch of the sources from some of the stuff that I took out of the clips. I'm gonna put it up. And the Gavi graphic, they were discussing at a soiree put on last year by Gavi, where all the governments and pharmaceutical reps all sent their people to a big powwow where they discussed how to convince people to take vaccines because it's just so important. What's wrong with those people? They don't know that vaccines are good. They're obviously good. We don't even need to talk about that part of the thing. But let's talk about how we convince people to take them. Look, 14 of the 17 SDGs require vaccination. That was last year. That was like November. I'll find the link for that too, and I'll put it under here. But, yeah. I don't have the best setup here. I'm trying to make this as palatable as possible. I know it's going to have my big ugly face in the middle, so that's what I had to work with. But, you know, I'm coming up on an hour here, and I'm just going to put this out because look, here's what I want. I want a discussion. I want to talk to the people that are doing what they're doing right now, who might be doing it because they think that they're helping people. And, you know, it has to do with groupthink as well. You get into a room full of people and they're all doing something and talk about something and acting in such a way that it seems normalized. Like it seems okay to just screw everybody in the free world over, destroy their jobs, destroy their livelihoods, and have a plan to take care of them based on taking all the existing corporations and the stakeholder capitalist companies that have agreed to this plan. And there's like, I mean, I've posted that stuff before too. There are some of the biggest corporations and banks in the world are all taking this as an opportunity that we just can't miss to take all this stuff about the Green New Deal and Agenda 2030 and sustainable, and put it into a tight little package and say, this is how we're going to move forward. We're going to create these green jobs. We're going to create the zero carbon world moving forward because carbon dioxide is bad. And, I mean, we can have that argument. This book, if you can see over here, False Alarm by Bjorn Lomborg, I've pointed it out before. It's a fantastic book. He points out that there's a lot of alarmism that surrounds climate science. And that alarmism was used as the impetus for creating the global 2030 agenda. Right? They were talking about, biodiversity loss and the sixth great extinction and all the kind of stuff that you might hear coming out of Extinction Rebellion. But generally speaking, on the left side of the spectrum. And the left side of the spectrum has devoured everything else in the world in the last decade. Through no small part because of critical theory and all the kind of stuff that James Lindsay, go look him up on YouTube, look up his most recent stuff. He talks about this way that these people have had their minds sort of, and their priorities geared towards this social justice activism. And social justice activism involves a number of things, but really what it involves is taking the people we were and steering us to be the people they think we could be if they just get all of their machinations in place. And they're doing it. They're doing it right now. And, again, I don't know. Is it a bad thing? I guess it remains to be seen. But it's not dissimilar from other communist revolutions. The only thing that is different is the fact that once they have this stuff out there, it's going to be impossible to opt out. It's all being laid right now, and I've spoken to friends about it who I think are sensible, and they see all this stuff, and they can't see it going as far as I'm suggesting it's going, and I'm saying if they have the banks and they have the health agencies and they have the governments all on board and they have the academics, I don't see how it can go any other way. I mean, we're looking at a pretty violent revolution in the United States when they try to destroy people's livelihoods and take away their guns and tell them they can't eat meat. And this is all part of it. You can't eat meat. You can't have guns. You can't own land. Private property will be a thing of the past. But it's all being done through blockchain so we can track everything. And the world is going to move forward. The question is, do the people that are now assuming the reins and the control over the formerly free world, do they have your best interests at heart? Have they even remotely thought this through? Certainly they have. They thought it through to such an extent that they have decided climate change is the biggest threat, existential threat to the world. Vaccines are good. We can solve both of those things with a giant world infrastructure administered through the UN and the WEF and their global strategic partners, who are some of the biggest corporations in the world that have all been going in this kind of leftist ideology, brainwashing with their employees for years. And anybody that says there might be something wrong with that is dismissed as a racist or a sexist or anti-science or climate denier. I mean, like, it could not be more obvious that these people have stopped listening to what regular people are saying. They don't care anymore what regular people think, because regular people are too foolish to control their own lives. And, you know, maybe if people didn't act that way, it would be true. But people do act that way. People are foolish. People are insensitive. They are thoughtless with some of the things they do. And the only kind of stuff that improves that situation is education. And unfortunately, not everybody is the type of person where they want to necessarily... That's the other thing about it, is that education, when they talk about education, they don't mean teaching you to think. They mean indoctrination. They mean, we're going to tell you how the world should be, and you're going to operate within those parameters. And that's what's happening. We're going to shut down conspicuous consumption. We're going to stop giving people the ability to do things that they think they should do. It's all going to be regulated by a supranational regulatory structure, universal basic income. And I go back to the comments about the psychopathic corporation, because I think that it really frames it well. Psychopaths are typically intelligent, personable, and disinhibited, and have an alluring aura of confidence. Yet they also lack feelings of empathy, guilt, and remorse. That seemingly minor emotional quirk has had a dramatic effect on the way they behave, often leading to antisocial behavior. However, psychopaths are not incapable of moral reasoning. Multiple studies have found that they are particularly adept at certain types of moral thinking, particularly those that balance the consequences of actions. So where non-psychopaths might experience revulsion at intentionally killing one person to save the lives of several others, psychopaths are far more likely to dispassionately favor the needs of the many over the needs of the few. They make good utilitarians. And I'm trying to stay away from anything that is not like perfectly obvious. Like, big business always puts its best foot forward or its best face forward and tries to ignore the bad stuff, right? You can't make better people by mandating that they be better people in the same way that you can't make people healthier by mandating vaccines. This is absurd. But it works for the many over the concerns of the few. And that's where we're at, I think. I just want to have the conversation. Because, like I said at the beginning of this, I think I said it, I don't have a job anymore. And so I have to decide where I'm going to go moving forward. And so I've been discussing with some people that I met at protests whether or not I could be a part of their group. And I got to tell you, man, this is where we're at as a society. I agree that people, when they're not engaged in thinking, actively thinking in their lives about things that are bigger than them, when they're not actively engaged in that endeavor, they can become a danger to people around them. I think that people should be responsible. I think that they should try to do whatever they can to make the world a better place through their actions. And I have tried to do that. I've tried to be that person. I have tried to tell people what was going on. I've been fired for it. I have tried to tell people that what's happening is our world is being upended to be replaced with this new world, which reeks a lot of communist stuff. And I'm not just saying that. Like there's a beautiful book called The Red Flag. I highly suggest everyone reads it. It's by one of the most foremost scholars on communism, I think from Oxford. And he wrote this book. And he talked about the history of it in several different countries and areas. And, the rhetoric is always the same. Psychopaths, when they get in trouble, and I'm not saying everyone's a psychopath, but what I'm saying is the way that people fit into these corporate structures, it's a level of separation from real people. It's a level of separation from reality. And these people have decided that capitalism is the problem. Now, I know that I'm saying that there's an issue here with the power dynamic where governments working hand in hand with corporations, giant corporations that don't necessarily tell the truth about stuff, and neither do governments for that matter. I mean, governments are the number one killer of people in the history of the world, by the way. I think we're going to keep going in that fashion. But the question becomes, how do you make better people? Which is something that I've been thinking about a lot. And I think that you can't mandate better people. I think that people, they either choose to look at life through the lens of, I have an opportunity here to do something with my life and make my life better, and I have to engage in it, and I want to engage with people around me that also want to engage in making their lives better in that same sort of way. And it's an attitude thing. And the problem with trying to enforce an attitude on the rest of the world is that people don't want to be told what to do, number one. They don't want forced vaccinations, number two. Especially people that don't like to be told what to do. Especially the people that like to think for themselves. And right now, this is a global coup of people who think that everyone else who doesn't agree with them is a problem, and so they need to be put into check. This is totally authoritarian, it's totalitarian, technocratic, elite control of the entire world. It's obvious. And you might say that it's not that different from where we were. Well, then I might say that you do not know what freedom is, or was, or what capitalism is, or the ability to choose how you either put your money in. But I'm terrible with money. I've been trying to get better. I'm terrible with impulse control. I've been trying to get better. But nobody's going to mandate that on me. You can't mandate that on me. And I suppose that means that I'm one of the people that's going to go to a re-education camp or whatever after I get my vaccines forced on me. That might or might not do some damage to me. That would not have happened if it was not mandated, which is why it has never been mandated in the United States. You have a right to personal autonomy and they're taking away that right. So, what rights are you going to have if you don't agree with the power structure that is currently being implemented? None. None. There will be no ability to opt out. But they know what's good for you, so you better listen and just do as you're told. You don't want to cause trouble for yourself. It's not that dissimilar from life as it was. But I don't think that they're properly. I think that they've drunk their own Kool-Aid at this point. And the world that we're leaving was one where at least people could be happy to know that they weren't constantly under the boot of surveillance. We could pretend that our lives were still somewhat free of influence and surveillance. But they weren't. They were constantly getting more and more tamped down, which that's just another excuse these people use to say that, oh, it's going to happen anyways, so it's inevitably. But I honestly think that, people can be better people if you just reach out to them and have conversations with them, like real conversations, like not mandating stuff and telling them how their life's going to be and telling them that they're going to be an issue if they don't agree with what has to happen. And it's inherently twisted. I don't know how people don't see that. So, as messy as that was, I'm probably just going to upload this. I've been trying to mess with some software to make a channel. I'm really not that adept at this stuff. I've been asking for help, but we're all alone in this new normal, I guess. We're all alone until we're not. But, just for the record, I love you all. And I'm ready to talk when you are. So,